The year is 1862. The Civil War has been raging for a little more than a year, and in Lawrenceville, where Arsenal Park now sits, the Allegheny Arsenal is operating around the clock. Inside a single-story frame building called the Laboratory, more than 1,000 people are hunched over work tables, rolling, pinching, tying, and bundling rifle cartridges filled with bullets and gunpowder. Daily, they make 30,000 rounds of ammunition for the Union Army.
Many were young women and children who were perfectly suited for creating these small ammunition packets because of their nimble, small fingers.
This is Susan Rodemaker, former parks curator for the Conservancy.
And it was a good source of income for many of the immigrant families who were living in Lawrenceville at the time.
Many of the children who worked at the arsenal were not much older than 10. There were no child labor laws yet, and also very few safety standards. That meant there wasn't a lot of attention to how live gunpowder was handled. When it spilled, it was just swept into the floor of the laboratory or out onto the road. And that's believed to be one of the contributors to the explosions that happened there at 2 p.m. on September 17, 1862.
There were actually 3 explosions that day. The true cause has never been identified, but is understood by most to have been caused by the sparking of a horseshoe on loose gunpowder, which would have been sprinkled around the building from deliveries. Where we're sitting right now, we can just look a little bit to our left, and that is where the building was.
78 people were killed. 54 were unidentifiable. Most were women and children. Their remains were buried in government-issued coffins and laid to rest in a mass grave at the nearby Allegheny Cemetery. It was the largest single loss of civilian life during the Civil War. But news of the explosion was nearly lost. It was overshadowed by the Battle of Antietam, fought on the very same day.
So there's a great solemnity about this park, and there's a story about America at war and marshaling its resources and the role that Pittsburgh played and the role that women played and children.
The powder magazine that housed the ammunition survived the explosion. It was far enough from the laboratory and was structurally sound. It's still in the park today, and the stone building has an important architectural history. It was designed by Benjamin Henry Latrobe, one of the country's most famous architects. He helped design both the U.S. Capitol and the White House. But even with the artifacts, not many who use or play in the park today know about its history. The tragedy that happened there has been overshadowed by new memories. That's something a park is particularly good at, creating new stories. This is For the Love of Parks. I'm Camilla Rivera Tinsley, and today we are in Arsenal Park.
My favorite memory from Arsenal Park is when my babysitter, Ian, taught me how to do the monkey bars.
I had my first kiss in the park. I can tell you exactly where it was. When you're walking in the park and you go past where the playground is, the third tree right there.
My favorite park in Pittsburgh is Arsenal. It's fun, it's fun, it's fun.
I love the tree canopy here.
Trees everywhere, old trees that do provide a huge amount of shade.
What's amazing is you walk into it and you don't even know all that's here.
My favorite part of Arsenal Park is the Lawrenceville farmers markets on Tuesday afternoons. And to just sit around and snack and catch up with your neighbors and watch everybody
really close
have
by our
a
house.
really nice time.
There's a ton of places to go because there's more than just the playground. There's tennis courts, basketball, there's swings. There's this whole skate place, and it's really cool.
I think the best part is that we're surrounded by history. Arsenal Park is it's a historic land.
By the last part of the 19th century, the property around the Allegheny Arsenal was being used by the community as an informal park. And in 1907, it became official. The 9 acres were gifted to the city of Pittsburgh and entrusted to the citizens of Lawrenceville. Arsenal Park is located in the heart of the neighborhood, between 39th and 40th Streets. But it has endured years of irregular park maintenance, which, if not reversed, could convert an asset into a liability. And that's why a plan for improving the park, for envisioning what it could be, was so important.
Once the Conservancy had its initial major projects completed, the Conservancy began to become involved with community parks on invitation.
Again, Susan Rodemaker.
And there was an invitation from folks that lived in Lawrenceville to the Conservancy to talk about the future of Arsenal Park. Because Arsenal is such a historic landscape in several ways, the Conservancy was very interested, as was the Conservancy interested in Allegheny Commons and Mellon Park and Westinghouse Park and McKinley Park. These are all community parks that serve multiple neighborhoods and that have fascinating histories and that are still present. You can still see them in the design and the physical texture of the landscape, buildings and details, the layout of the walks. And a lot of these historic designs still work really well, but there are needs for restoration, for updating, for meeting people's needs today. And so the Conservancy is really interested in how do we bring forward those historic values and protect them so that the park retains its character and special quality while meeting present needs, including climate change and maintenance regimes and pests for trees, a big variety of things. How people use public space has changed a lot in the last 2 years. So Arsenal is a beautiful example of a park that has very strong community support and love and attention and use. Every single person I've met has lots of stories and fond memories here, and they want to make more.
Arsenal Park's master plan is still a work in progress. People in the neighborhood had been trying to get some attention for the park for a long time. But the most recent efforts started in earnest around 2012.
Hi, I'm Randall Salkin. I'm a resident of Lawrenceville for a little over 10 years. I live across the street from Arsenal Park, and I am president of Friends of Arsenal Park. My very first memory of this park is sitting on the top floor office of my house and looking out the window across the street and seeing an very overgrown park with garbage everywhere, with no one in the park, and thinking it couldn't have been this way. At some point, this is a beautiful piece of land that at some point had to have been well loved.
Randall started talking to his neighbors, longtime residents of Lawrenceville, people who were born and raised here, and asking them about the park.
And I heard just the most amazing stories about how, 40, 50, 60 years ago when they were children, the park was the central meeting place for everyone, and they would come out here, and there were, depending on the season, there were 2 or 3 full-time employees, and there was one person doing maintenance, there was another person who was doing activities, and during the summer there was a third person who added to the activities, and they had games, they had balls, they had bats, they had everything stored up in the powder magazine, and it sounded extraordinary, and I just thought, it can't be exactly the same, but why can't it be something similar in the current times?
Okay, my name is Mary Moses. I've lived in Lawrenceville approximately 50-some years. I'm 72 years old. I lived on Denny Street. I've been really active in the community.
Years before the Friends of Arsenal Park came on the scene, Mary had been involved in a larger master plan for all of Lawrenceville, and she's been a huge supporter of the park. She has decades' worth of memories there.
In the winter, we ice skated on the pond. In the summer, we played tennis in the tennis courts. The people from the city, there was a woman and 2 guys and then a younger kid. They pretty much staffed the park all the time except for Sundays. They had balls and bats and basketballs and sort of games, anything that you wanted you could do, they had from the city. But the most memorable part was Mrs. White. And I remember her just completely. And she was the one that ran sort of the activities. She was real big on pets. She always had pet shows. And she was real big on story reading. But her cousin, I believe, was E.B. White. So every year she would read us Charlotte's Web in the Park. So that was a really neat connection there.
With help from the 2 community groups in the neighborhood, Lawrenceville United and Lawrenceville Corporation, Randall got the word out that he was looking for other neighbors to join him.
Hi, my name is Christine Brill. I'm an architect. I've lived in Lawrenceville since '99, And I've been involved with Friends of Arsenal Park and local neighborhood tree planting efforts recently. I don't remember my first memory, but one of the most poignant ones was when my son was a toddler and he got away from me and he ran towards the pond, which was full of disgusting, stagnant water that hadn't drained for several days after an epic stormwater event. So that's my most poignant memory. Everything else pales.
Randall and Christine and Mary and other neighbors started meeting up to talk about the park and what they could do to get things going.
We did decide that it made sense to try to work with the Parks Conservancy, and I know I worked with Susan to write the first grant application to get, I don't know where else all the money came from, but I know that was a piece of it.
Councilman Dowd and Senator Furlow both contributed. So yeah, they were both fantastic. They both recognized the need of the park to the community.
There's such a density of houses that a lot of people may not even have a backyard, much less a front yard. So we need our park, and Arsenal really plays an important role in a lot of people's lives.
Lawrenceville has always been strange. It's been very strange. It was always divided. There was the 6th Ward, there was the 9th Ward, and there was the 10th Ward. But Arsenal Park was a big deal.
It's a historic land. I mean, not only was it the site of the Allegheny Arsenal, which was one of the main munitions suppliers during the Civil War, but post-Civil War, Arsenal Park, in 1907 was granted to the city because Lawrenceville needed something like this for the community. The community was primarily housing for steel workers, so there were a lot of people in very tiny houses with almost no outside land, and so they recognized that a park like this was needed so that people could get outside and enjoy the fresh air.
Like all the master plans the Parks Conservancy has been involved with, key was hearing directly from the people who love and use the park. Again, Susan Rodemaker.
As a parks curator, it was important to me to both collect the stories that people have about the park, because that tells us what the park means to people, and to understand the history of the park, how it evolved and changed over time, and to share that with the public. The more people know about the place, the better choices they can make. And the more that we dig in a thoughtful planning process, the more we learn from the people that use the place, and that's essential. So the planning process was one that had leadership from a collaboratory group, including Lawrenceville United, the Lawrenceville Corporation, Friends of Arsenal Park, the Parks Conservancy, the Department of City Planning, and the Department of Public Works, both city agencies. And we met very regularly to draft an RFP, to select the landscape architecture firm, to guide the master planning process, and to plot out the community engagement process. So that was a mix of workshops that were indoors with big maps and challenging questions, and the invitation for people to think about how they want to use the space and how it could be improved. From walks in the park, where again we were eliciting stories and observing how people reacted to certain spaces. I think we got a much better appreciation of what spaces are really sacred to people. We also created an on-site kiosk with help from Christine Brill, the architect, that had lots of images posted and questions and maps and invitation to people to comment and leave notes, and it was really great.
These conversations were happening in all kinds of spaces and places. The farmers market, the senior center, churches, on the playground, the local parent playgroup, the library, anywhere Lawrenceville residents could be found. The idea was to compile sort of a grand wish list for the park, and no wish was off the table.
My favorite request of all was for a chocolate fountain. Some wonderfully imaginative child felt that there should be a chocolate fountain in the park. And why not? And they drew it, and it was gorgeous. But, it's really fun to tap into a child's imagination about how they want to play and how they want to be stimulated and excited. And, even from a chocolate fountain, we can get some ideas.
Kids were definitely a big part of the process, especially when it came time to vote for a new play structure.
So we went to Arsenal Park to vote on a new design for the park, and it was really neat. We had these stickers, 1, 2, and 3, and we placed them from best to worst. Personally, I think I like the design right now more than any of those had, but they probably will add new things that are much cooler, so I'm all for it.
Arsenal Park is still in that sometimes rocky period of going from vision to reality. The master plan that the Parks Conservancy completed in 2015 was handed off to the city for implementation. They will see it through to a more detailed design and then ultimately construction. Phase 1 of the project, a new imaginative play area, is expected to break ground in early summer. But the reality is that the city budgets and timelines don't always match the community's expectations.
How many times we have met, how many plans we have drawn up and not drawn up, and how many times we kind of were led down the primrose path and, oh yes, this is what we're going to do, it's going to be so beautiful and wonderful. And then all of a sudden all these other parks appear. They got a spray park over here, they got something over there in Garfield, they're opening something in the West End, and we're just sitting here. It's like, wait a minute, this is a historic site. So number one, we don't want to mess anything up having to do with the history. However, this is a very important part of the city of Pittsburgh. You know, how long do we have to wait?
I think that in terms of the planning, we've definitely taken a step back in terms of quality of the elements that are going into the park. But in general, the fact that we're doing anything is fantastic. The fact that the city is budgeting the work in the park and that we're not going to have to go out and raise millions of dollars is fantastic. You know, so there's pluses and minuses.
Yeah, no, I never expected my kids to maybe still be old enough to play in the playground by the time anything happened. So I am grateful. I'm grateful that this is happening. But I don't know how we're not doing this holistically. How can you plan for a park of this magnitude? How can you do stormwater planning if you're doing it like a chunk of a park at a time? And I understand that we're short on money. I get that. But it feels like this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and don't we have a lot of big companies, and can't we sort of fundraise and think a little bigger?
There are a lot of desires packed onto this little 9-acre plot of land. But that's true everywhere, of every park. Lots of desires, and working with the people through the process, you find the right balance. And I think people will come here because it's a beautiful park. It's a beautiful park now. It'll just become more beautiful. It has great potential to be even more meaningful to people. But once they're here, they'll begin to discover the history, because eventually there will be some interpretive materials. There may be a display in the Powder magazine, commemorative art installation. But, you know, come for the fun, stay for the meaning.
That's it for this episode of For the Love of Parks. This episode was written and produced by Andy Kubis. I'm Camilla Rivera Tinsley, and I hope to see you in the park.